diplomatic offensive lately, and we want to discuss this with Behnam Taleblu and Ambassador Michael Oren. Thank you both for joining us. Behnam, let me start with you. Is the Middle East changing in front of our eyes?
Well, pleasure to be with you both, and happy Persian New Year as well. Happy Nowruz. In short, the Middle East is actually always in a rather kinetic rather than static state, even when viewed through the prism of America, Israel, and and others, let alone the adversaries of those states. So in this case, the Iranians have been looking to use diplomacy not to remove, but rather to complement their existing military strategy towards the region. As you know, they've had an asymmetric war against Saudi Arabia and many of the Gulf Cooperation Council states for several decades now. They've turned that on steroids really since 2019, and they've seen some hedging. And so this movie that we're watching, this change in real time that we're seeing, is Iran trying to rope-a-dope the GCC, trying to stop the Abraham Accords, which was expanding and in my view should continue to expand, and ultimately is them trying to cement political gains through formerly military means.
Ambassador Oren, how do you see this?
I see it as a shift, it's a tectonic shift in the Middle East. It's the result of a long-term withdrawal of America from the Middle East. The Saudis realizing that the United States may not be there to defend Saudi Arabia, certainly since the United States is still seeking a nuclear deal with Iran. And I can't help thinking, Yaakov, that this also has a certain connection to what's going on in Israel today. Israel, which has positioned itself as the great defender of the Gulf against Iranian aggression, is now deeply engaged in internal disagreements over judicial reform and other issues, and doesn't seem to have a lot of bandwidth for dealing with the Iranian threat.
Well, Ambassador, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel was trying from the first day after he got elected a couple of months ago to have a visit, an official visit to the UAE. Never happened.
Well, that's because of different issues. I think that's related to Israel's policy under this government vis-a-vis Judea and Samaria, our reaction to Palestinian terror, to building of Jewish settlements and communities in Judea and Samaria. I think that the UAE and other Gulf countries are in a wait-and-see position to see how this government proceeds on those issues, on the Palestinian issue directly. But I think there's also a deeper strategic issue. Is this government in a position to make the type of decisions that may become necessary should Iran break out and create a nuclear weapon?
Behnam, do you see a strong cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, or more of a, symbolic ties?
It's a very important question. The Iranians are looking to turn a molehill into a mountain. Make no mistake, it's not like the Saudis and the Iranians have forgotten about the orientation of alliances in the region, the ethno-sectarian differences, and the structural differences between the states and the orders and visions of the region that they represent. The Saudis likely want to have the Iranians help the Houthis tamp down and come to an end to the conflict in Yemen. The Saudis obviously want to see the Iranians be much more responsible players, but I also think the Saudis are quite realistic when it comes to what the Iranians will be able to actually deliver. I think the Iranians are the ones who want to push this into something much larger and say that they've gotten the Saudis on their side, whereas in reality, the Saudis are hedging. And that has more to do with the things that Ambassador Oren has said at the 50,000-foot level, which is the Saudi relationship with Washington, the future of the U.S. force posture in the Middle East, and, of course, the elephant in the room, which is the fact that China is now the largest trader partner of Saudi Arabia, and China is now the largest trade partner of Iran. And it, as a competitor to America, may have a fundamentally different vision for what the order and balance of power in the Persian Gulf could look like. So I don't think the Saudis are going to be getting anything majorly from the Iranians, given the 4 decades of track record of Iranian bad behavior in that region.
Right. To that point, Ambassador Oren, the fact that China was like the matchmaker here, that also is a major change, isn't it?
A huge change. And I'll just add to these important points I just made, that China is also Israel's major trading partner. Just this year, China has surpassed the United States as Israel's major trading partner. And that has certainly complicated the issue. China is building Israel's northern and southern ports. It's building the subway here, a few hundred meters from where I'm standing in South Tel Aviv. Many of the construction projects in the city are being performed by Chinese laborers, which makes our American allies very nervous, and I think justifiably so. But China is not only aggressing economically and structurally into the Middle East, it's also militarily and strategic in the Middle East. China has built the largest naval base in Africa, in Djibouti, which is at the entrance of the Red Sea. China is slated to build 2 ports on the Persian Gulf, and China has recently signed a $400 billion 25-year treaty with Iran, which has a military dimension.
Right. Behnam, it's a zero-sum game with Iran. When you have more of Iran, you'd have less of Israel. Is that going to be the effect on the Abraham Accords?
That's what Iran is hoping for. The Saudis, of course, and with the rest of the GCC, it's worth taking a wider view on. The norm for this region is actually balancing and hedging. It actually was an aberration to see the consistent hawkishness from some of these countries towards Iran, particularly since 2019. Lest we forget, for instance, during the Iran-Iraq war, Kuwait was one of the biggest hawks against the Islamic Republic. That is certainly not the case today. Qatar is one who has raised and it has ebbed and flowed its relationship with Iran, now much more closer, particularly since 2015 than ever before. So again, the Iranians want to be the ones to say, we beat Jerusalem to Riyadh. We are the one who have roped the GCC. The Saudis are the one who are trying to turn this into something much more tactical with the Iranians. Perhaps there's a strategic element with the Chinese there. But I think the prescription for the U.S. is simple. Now is the time to actually double down on the region. Now is actually the time to see global power and great power competition as having a regional element to it. Now is the time to repair the relationship between the Saudis and the Americans and show how you can be a good friend. Because lest we forget, these folks in the region have other options. And this deal is not an end game. It's a signal to what that potential end game could be. So now is the time to course correct, not to abandon. The Iranians want this to be a divorce for all sides. We have to actually double down.
Ambassador Oren, they were talking in Israel about normalization with Saudi Arabia very soon. Is this off the table now?
I don't think it's exactly on the table. I think just this morning I was having discussions about new business arrangements between Saudi Arabia and Israel. It can happen on different levels. It may not be a ceremonial opening of embassies, but it can happen with the opening of business, certainly the opening of airspace, of Saudi airspace to Israeli aircraft. But I certainly agree with Dr. Taleblu here about everything was said. And this is the time to work for reconciliation to the United States and Saudi Arabia. Enough already. I recently came back from a tour of the United States where I was asked on campuses, what are the chances, the same question you asked, what are the chances for reconciliation between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and what can America do to contribute to that? I think the question is, what can Israel do to help achieve a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Washington?
Yeah, we have about a minute, Ambassador. Obviously, Israel's main concern is Iran going nuclear, and there were efforts to make some sort of a coalition in the Gulf. What's going to happen with that?
Right, the coalition remains. At the end of the day, Israel will have to act by itself to defend itself. And as Iran approaches threshold capacity, the ability to make a bomb in a matter of weeks, even a matter of days, that's going to greatly impact our deterrence power. For example, if Hezbollah opens fires at us tomorrow with tens of thousands of rockets, we're going to have to take into consideration that Iran made nuclear bombs.
We'll leave it at that because we have to go to a break. Thank you very much, both of you. And after the break, when we come back, 20 years after the U.S. invasion to